Welcome back for another thought-provoking Green Box Politics Classic. So what I want you to do right now is I want you to take your attention and your consciousness and think on these situations where you would have these neighborhood so-called drug dealers in the so-called black community, whether they be New York, Chicago, LA, Atlanta, Houston, etc. But that concept of coming back during Thanksgiving and giving out turkeys, or coming back during back to school time and getting all the children haircuts and hairdos and book bags, pencils and crayons, or coming back to the community during Thanksgiving, Christmas time rather, and giving out, bicycles and presents and toys. Do you want to know why the so-called black American drug dealer does that? Because although on that one day or those couple of days on those so-called holidays, he goes back to provide some type of a sustenance and resource, but the other 360 plus days throughout the year, he is acting as Satan himself, destroying the community, pumping dirty water in the veins of the men and women in the form of what we call heroin, or creating clouds of death in what we call crack. But throughout the rest of the time in the year, he's causing a bunch of chaos, pain, death, and trauma. Or it could be through the gang violence, the random shootouts, where people may just be wanting to go to the park and hang out and have a cookout, but they can't do it because there's an alleged gang beef and it's supposed to be some type of retaliation. So throughout all the other days in the year, you causing all these problems and all this anguish. But during this one day in the year, you're going to come and give some, BS turkey or some bullshit bicycle and clothes. The reason why is because there's a subconscious guilt and shame and humiliation that the so-called black American male drug dealer feels by knowing that he's destroying his own people to make the money. I want you to also think about in a lot of the mobster movies where they'll show the Italian gangsters up in New York specifically, and how, at first they weren't really into the drug game and the drug trade with heroin and cocaine. But when they did decide to get into it, they said, look, we're going to get into this, but all the heroin that we distribute, we want this to go to the so-called black American community, and we want the users to be so-called black American. So we're going to make the money from the drug game, but we're going to do it in someone else's community and bring destruction to their community, not our own. And that's what you saw the Italian mobsters, the Chinese mobsters, the Jewish mobsters, the Russian mobsters, etc. The French Connection. This is what they were doing to make their money. But then you have the disenfranchised Aboriginal American man, and, a lot of these economic booby traps that we're put in, some of them are intentional, but it's going to take a lot of willpower and a lot of you wanting to lean towards your higher self to prevent you from making these choices. But you end up getting the drugs and you want to distribute them, but you're lazy and you sit there and do it right in your own community. You do it to your neighbors, you do it to, your family members, etc. You watch these people go down. You watch their teeth rot and decay. You watch the women prostitute themselves and give their babies up for collateral so they can get them an 8 ball of cocaine until, 2 weeks when they get paid. You sit back and you watch this and you subconsciously, what you're doing. But like I said, you're lazy. And a lot of it is a certain self-hate and a certain anger that you have towards the so-called black community, because it stems from your own family probably being absent and not really being involved in your life. So there's a certain, you have a big disinterest when it comes to your own image. So that makes it easy to sell to your other people. But the reason why the so-called drug dealer does that is a certain guilt and shame. Now, in the movie Scarface that came out in the early 80s that starred Al Pacino as Tony Montana, although Tony had a lot of, he had a lot of blood on his hands. Tony did a lot of dirt, Tony committed a lot of negative or evil deeds. Tony was a devil in his own right. When he first got to the United States of America, he was poor. He was coming from Cuba as a refugee. And, he was washing dishes, but he saw the people across the street, at the clubs. They were living good, had the nice cars, the nice clothes, the nice women. And then his partner, he told him, he said, man, ain't nothing wrong with a little bit of coke money. That's what they doing here, basically. So they got in ultimately by being the muscle. They did the one, assassination. They stabbed the guy up on the boat. And after they did that deed, they got to the States and they let the people know, like, look, we put in work already. So, give us a better opportunity. And long story short, that guy, Omar Suarez, who ended up being a rat, he gave them that, the deal to go deal with the Colombians. And of course, Tony's guy ended up being killed. So, in retaliation, of course, Tony killed the dude. And then he ended up meeting Frank. And after he meets Frank, he peeps game on Frank. He realizes Frank is not really street savvy. He's not street smart. Frank has a lot of weaknesses. Sometimes he's a little too nice and he's too naive of certain things. He can be gullible. So Tony peeped that. He sniffed that pretty quick. And he also peeped that, Frank's wife was, she was disinterested. She was detached. She was emotionally unavailable. She seemed to be bored. She was a little bit spoiled. So Tony was able to assess the situation pretty quickly, and he was able to maneuver in the right way. And then it fast forwards to, of course, Tony and the guy, Omar, sent down to Bolivia to meet with Sosa. And Sosa's the big plug. He's the real businessman, the real, powerful, the one that's actually creating the drug to distribute to the United States. So that was the relationship. The, creation and the manufacture of the drug was coming from South America, Central America, and being trafficked through Mexico later on. And the consumption of the drug, primarily the number one market, or one of them at least, is the United States of America. So that was the relationship. So Tony was now, going to meet with actually the man who's, creating the drug, and then he could be the one to be the primary distributor in the States. So that was, what Tony peeped, and he saw that. And him being a wolf, he could sniff the situation. So that's why when Tony went down to Bolivia, he was very laid back. He already peeped what was going on. He already knew Frank was, not really a shark and couldn't see what time it was. And then this dude, Omar Suarez, he couldn't trust him anyway. So, long story short, Tony ends up getting plugged in. So now he's the man. Frank is out the way. Omar is killed. And now Frank getting the shipment of the dope in, the big packages in, and now he's money laundering, and, you all have seen the movie. So throughout all this, Tony is providing drugs, and these drugs are a little cleaner now. It's not as stepped on as, the dope is today, but there are certain murders that's happening. So once again, Tony got some negative karma that he is storing up rather in this world. And in this space and time, and in this incarnation, in this lifetime. Also, I want to pause. You got to remember that in this life, both the positive or favorable or good deeds you do, they're being recorded just like the negative or malefic deeds you do as well. And none of us are perfect, but at the end of the game, aka upon your pending death, you want the scoreboard to say that your good deeds outweighed your bad deeds or your negative deeds. And that's really what this whole life lesson is about, learning from mistakes and errors and cleaning those mistakes and errors up by making, choices that lead to good deeds. And, we just want to pray that the Almighty Creator, which is what is responsible for our soul force, our life force, our spiritual essence, our spiritual being, the true us, the inner us, when it returns back to its origin, you want the Almighty to be pleased with you. I'll just say that and leave it at that, right? And, to me, being just a man down here in this life experience, one of the ways that maybe we can please the Almighty Creator is by having, more good deeds that can outweigh the bad deeds. And certain bad deeds that we had, maybe there was a sacrifice that had to be made in order to correct that wrong, to somewhat change it into either a neutral deed or a good deed or a favorable deed. And that's what you see the street niggas try to do when they give out them bullshit turkeys. They're trying to change, their bad deeds into a good deed, but that's not strong enough. It has to be a bigger sacrifice. It has to be a greater sacrifice. It has to weigh a lot more. So that's not going to cut it. There has to be, some bloodshed. There has to be money lost. There has to be a crumbling of an empire. There have to be packs that have to be confiscated by the government or whomever. But in other words, what the satanic force gave you through your Luciferian deeds in the streets, you have to somewhat sacrifice and give up that comfort that it provided you and go back to a state of, being lowly and being humbled and having to work your way back up. And you don't have now all these, these things that you have gained and acquired through you being, You know what I'm saying? In your demonic lower self. So the things that you acquired, the comfort you acquire from being in your demonic self, you have to give that up, to try to, transmutate or perform the proper alchemical equation for you to change that bad deed into a good deed. So your soul force can be happy within you, and you can be content with this life, and you can be able to look in the mirror and be proud of yourself. Okay. So this is, why street niggas do that. But anyway, Tony Montana, he had that same predicament and circumstance. So it boils down to now Tony is being asked by Sosa. He says, hey, look, remember Tony came in town and he met a lot of the other governmental officials and military men. These were like the real big power players of the world that, Tony Montana was connected to in the drug game that he may have not necessarily known about. Because Sosa was a bigger player in the chess game than Tony may have realized. Tony may have thought initially that, okay, this is just the main plug I'm getting the drugs from in Bolivia. He's creating it and manufacturing it, but he probably didn't know like how big the relationship was between, let's say, the drug traffickers of South America and the CIA and the DEA and the corrupt government and law enforcement of those countries down there and those cities down there. Tony may have not known how big that was. So when Sosa brought him in that room and he saw all those other men, Tony was probably like, okay, he was shaking his head like, damn, this shit big. You know what I'm saying? It's a lot of people involved in this. A lot of United States men who were part of the government, but they were involved in the drug gang. If you want to get a little bit more insight on this, I would recommend you go watch Narcos on Netflix, but it'll give you a very, very good, reenactment, a little bit of what I'm talking about. So Tony is introduced to all these power players, and there is a man who is in media and broadcast who is going on a tour, basically. And he is explaining to the world that there are these drug traffickers out of South America. He starts to name names, and there is actually, a journalistic report he does that is going to air on the TV. And Sosa is one of the names, and a couple of the other men that are part of this meeting that Tony Montana is at. Now, if this journalism report comes out, it's going to blow the top on everything that they have, their whole operation. And everybody's going down, the corrupt law enforcement, the corrupt governmental officials, the drug traffickers, everybody's going down and everybody's going to prison and the empire falls. So Sosa and his associates, they cannot have that happen. So what they do is they say, look, Tony, we need you. We're going to send one of our hitmen, our assassins with you. And we need you to take him to the guy's car so he can put this bomb under it, and then it'll explode. It'll kill the guy, and he'll never be able to come out with this report. And initially, Tony agrees to do it. So then they go into the process of doing it. They riding around. I believe the guy was in New York. And, they're looking for the guy, and eventually they find him, right? But when they find him, he's with his wife and children. Now, at this point, Tony goes into remember, Tony is still a human being. He's a man. So now he's going to have that battle of the lower self versus the higher self, his angel consciousness and his demon consciousness. His higher self is saying, I'm not about to kill no woman and children. Like if we going to get this guy who's doing the journalistic report, okay, cool. But, we'll get him and him only. Like, I'm not about to kill no woman and children. That's not what I ain't signed up to do that. But his demon self is saying, no, we need to go ahead and smoke whoever we need to smoke. Sosa paid us. Look at all those other powerful people that was with Sosa. We don't want to mess the money up. We don't want to release our relationship with them and our network with them. We got to keep them happy. So we got to kill whomever. And if this woman and child got to be a casualty in this, then so be it. That's what his demon self is saying. So in that moment when Tony was, battling within himself, you can tell throughout that scene because like the dude's telling Tony to get a little bit closer because they got to be at least within 30 meters so he could actually, detonate the bomb. And while they going through all this, Tony was like, man, nah, like this, like you could see his soul and his spirit inside. It was like warning him that, look, you've been moving a certain way in this life, but this is like your ultimate test right here. The choice that you make from this point forward probably will determine, you know what I'm saying, your soul and spirit's journey in the afterlife. That's what Tony is feeling within himself. This is what his soul is telling him, and he's hearing it. So Tony was like, oh no, I can't do this. It's like I can't have that on my consciousness. As a matter of fact, I think he said that in the movie. He said, I can't have that on my mind. I can't have that on my conscience. And he was like, fuck that. And then he ended up, of course, shooting a guy in the head. So he ended up killing the assassin that Sosa sent with them. So what ends up happening is the report is done. The public finds out about, Sosa and his associates and their drug operation. And now law enforcement is onto them. So now Sosa is very pissed and he's nervous. He's anxious. He calls Tony. He basically asks Tony, he says, what happened? And Tony's real kind of like, nonchalant about it. He's in there. Tony's high as hell. He's basically saying like, yeah, your dude didn't listen. You know what I'm saying? We went to get old boy. Basically, I gave him an instruction on how we was going to do it, and he didn't agree, so I had to cancel his contract. So then Sosa kind of goes into a frenzy. He's like, you don't understand. Like, there won't be a fucking next time. Like, he was telling him, like, no, there won't be no next time. Like, you don't understand. Like our friend has security up the ass now. Like the report came out. Like, he was like, dude, you don't fucking get it. He was like, we're going down with this shit. Like, our whole operation, everything that I've built, my whole empire. Now my business associates who work in the government and stuff, they may turn me over. Like these military, guerrilla, soldiers that I've been dealing with that's in the backwoods of the jungles of South America. Like they like, no, this thing is serious now. Like, dude, you don't get what just happened. So then Tony was like, you know what I'm saying? Hey man, like, it is what it is, basically. Like, in other words, his subconscious was telling him, like, look, I had to make the choice that was going to lead my soul to something better. I had to perform the alchemy. I had to perform the transmutation. And he subconsciously is saying is that, and the thing of value that I had to sacrifice was my relationship with you, because you're the man that made me a multimillionaire. So this is all really what subconsciously Tony is telling him. And then, of course, Sosa he says the famous line. He says, I told you a long time ago, you fucking little monkey, not to fuck me. And then, of course, he hung up on him. And, you know what I'm saying? Tony was going, crazy and high as hell and dropping the phone and all that. And then next thing we know, it seemed like it was a couple of hours later, he sent the hit squad. But Tony had already made his mind up. Like, it was like, bro, I don't give a fuck. You know what I'm saying? Like, he already had killed his homeboy. His sister was pissed off. His mom was pissed off at him. He had already been caught because, remember, they caught him through the clock when they was, counting up the money and stuff like that. So he had to deal with that situation. So he was already out on bail. So he was probably starting to see his empire falling a little bit. So he was very pissed off. You know what I'm saying? Pissed off, frustrated, probably felt real numb, and he was just high. He was snorting literally mountains and you know what I'm saying, and sand dunes of cocaine, And then, of course, he sent the hitters in there. Sosa sent his hitters, and then they went to war. And that's what basically Tony said. He said, they want to go to war, let's go to war. It remind me of that Gucci Man song. This AR I have no license for, but I don't give a damn. You just started a war. That's how my nigga Tony felt. He was like, shit, ain't no damn license for this AR. I got a grenade on this motherfucker. Like, fuck it. It is what it is. Like, y'all niggas just prepare. And then, they went and they had the shootout. You know what I'm saying? And you just got to think about the type of adrenaline that Tony had pumping through him at that moment. He was high out of his mind. The adrenaline was pumping. Of course, his sister had been shot by one of the hitmen. I mean, it was on. And that's why Tony was Mr. All or Nothing. Tony really was like my nigga KO in that time. You know what I'm saying? My boy Akeem KO, man. Like, Tony was Mr. All or Nothing. He was like, bro, fuck it. Either I'm going to kill y'all niggas or y'all going to kill me. But ain't no turning back. Fuck Sosa. You know what I'm saying? I'm not going to kill them women and children. Nigga, fuck it. And then that's what happened. And then, of course, in the end, Tony ended up being killed. Now, how would the Almighty Creator deal with Tony in this fictional situation? Once again, I'm not God Almighty. But what I can say is this: while you in this life, in this physical incarnation, the malefic deeds that you have done, you do want to do your best to correct them here. And one of the way that street niggas have to correct theirs is that the possessions and the things that they have acquired, the relationships, the networks, the things that they have acquired through them being in their demon lower self in the streets, and how those relationships, connections, and resources that they've acquired provides like a luxury or a kind of comfort in this life. They have to lose it and give it up and go back like to zero. And if that possibly means even giving up their life, then you may have to do that as well. But like spiritually and subconsciously, this is ultimately what Tony Montana was going through. You know, this is ultimately what he was going through. And I would say just me being, on the outside looking in and just evaluating this story on like a more three-dimensional level, like spiritually, I would say, like, if you would have asked me, did that one deed when Tony decided not to kill that woman and children, did that one deed wipe out and may have cleaned up a lot of the other negativity that he did in his life? I would like to say it probably could have. And that's including the bad relationship he had with his mother and sister, all the dope he put in the streets, all the people that he ended up getting killed and stepped on himself, and how he slimed out Frank, and well, really Frank, did himself in, but basically all the other negative stuff that Tony had done. Could that one deed, when he sacrificed his relationship with Sosa and his life to save that woman and children, and in return the report coming out, that one deed could outweigh a lot of that other bad that he did. And this is me just playing somewhat of a game with you and challenging you to think and look at it from another perspective. But salute, ladies and gentlemen. Y'all stay tuned. We out. Green Box Politics. Stay down and come up.